ingredients are carefully selected and prepared with the passion they deserved. The hotness of fresh red pepper melting with the sweetness of tomatoes and onions to create the most unique and exquisite flavors. 100% natural ingredients and no artificials. Feel the unique experience of our new crisp potato chips. The new Chipsy Crinkles. We know you'll love them.
Of democracy on Prime Television. As usual, I'm your usual host, Carlan Mchima, to be with you up until the hour of 21:30 hours, discussing nothing but important national issues. Today we are honored and privileged to be joined in the studio by His Excellency, the Ambassador, the U.S. Ambassador to Zambia, Mr. Eric Schultz, who's going to be discussing with us many important issues in what we've titled Zambia U.S. Relations. Your Excellency, good evening and welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for the invitation to be here, and congratulations on the pronunciation of my name, Callan, because most people pronounce it either as shirts, shoes, or shorts, and you got it just right.
I'll tell you that I had a rehearsal pronouncing your name because I didn't want to tongue twist myself, so I've been rehearsing how to pronounce that name, and I'm glad that I pronounced it correctly.
Well, as we were discussing before the program started, it's a German name. One thing about the United States is that everyone in the United States is descended pretty much from immigrants, with the exception of Native Americans. So we all come from someplace else, and in my case, my ancestors were German on my father's side, and on my mother's side, Scottish.
Okay.
So difficult name to pronounce, but in Germany it's quite common.
Okay, interesting. All right. So the ambassador, just as I said in my preamble, will be helping us to discuss the topic that we've titled Zambia-U.S. relations. You know, the relationship between Zambia and U.S. dates way back, but we'll be getting into details as we go on with the program. Your Excellency, maybe even as we start with our program, briefly would want to know who Ambassador Eric Schultz is, professional background.
Well, I've been a U.S. diplomat for 30 years. I've specialized in two parts of the world, Southern Africa and Eastern Europe. Prior to this assignment, I was the number 2 at our embassy in Ukraine. Before that, I served in Moscow, Tbilisi, Ashgabat, and in this part of the world, I was our number 2 at the embassy in Zimbabwe from 2004 to 2007. So in many respects for us, coming to Zambia is a bit like coming home. I can honestly say that our favorite assignment from the point of view of living was Zimbabwe. We loved the Zimbabwean people, very warm, very friendly, very gracious, very much like Zambians. Let's see, I'm from a part of the United States that's very different weather-wise from Zambia. I grew up in Minnesota, which is in the central part of the United States. I went to college at a place called McAllister. Our most famous alumni is Kofi Annan, who had never seen snow before he arrived from Ghana in the 70s to attend college at Macalester, St. Paul, Minnesota. So very cold place, and we're again very happy to be in Zambia in a nice, pleasant climate. I'm married to a Polish, originally Polish, now American,
Okay.
woman, and we have two children. One is 13 and the other 11, Alec and Adam, and they attend the American school here. I don't know, what else would you like to know?
Briefly, I think that's more than enough.
All right, thank you.
It's more than
Thank you.
enough. Your Excellency, Zambia just turned 51 years of independence. Your quick analysis of what has transpired in the 51 years, and of course your word to the Zambian people during this day,
Sure.
which
Well,
you just had.
I'm not sure how you can do a quick analysis of 51 years, but let me start by congratulating the Zambian people on 51 years of independence. It's a great achievement, and I think it's something that all Zambians should be very, very proud of. The thing that they should probably be the most proud of, I would argue, is that it's 51 years of peace and stability and unity, and that's actually maybe the key thing to keep in mind. Zambia's had kind of an uneven history economically, but politically it's a country that over time has become increasingly democratic, and that's reflected in your elections, which are by and large peaceful and relatively free. It's also, I think, maybe more importantly, it's reflected in the mentality of the Zambian people, who strike me as very democratic in their outlook on things.
All right. Having said that, I'm sure we'll be getting into the Zambia-U.S. relations. Briefly, if you can look at how you would describe the relations between your country, the U.S., and Zambia.
Sure, I would say that the relationship that at this stage is excellent. Actually, I mean, across the board, we have a good relationship with Zambia in many different sectors. I think the key thing to come back to again is the fact that we have the foundation of that good relationship is shared values. The United States is as committed to democracy as Zambia is.
In the area of trade, how have you performed the two countries in terms of trade? How are you cooperating?
Well, you can say that we have an excellent relationship, and you can still identify areas where we could improve. And the reality, of course, is that the American economy is $15 trillion, more or less, and the Zambian economy is about $30 billion, more or less. So, it's a very unequal economic relationship from that point of view. It's also true that we're not very close to one another. The United States is in North America, Zambia is in Africa, so we're not natural trade partners.
Indeed.
That said, I think that we have an economic relationship. It's been growing. We've been looking for ways to speed that growth. One of those ways is the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which was recently renewed by Congress.
That's AGOA.
AGOA, exactly. In 2011, the AGOA Forum was actually held here. Secretary, possibly future President Hillary Clinton actually came to Lusaka for that forum. And what AGOA is designed to do is basically allow African goods to enter the United States duty-free. So it should actually act to increase African exports to the United States. Zambia has taken some advantage of it. It could do more. By contrast, I think that the United States also should be doing more economically, not just in Zambia, but really in sub-Saharan Africa in general. From my point of view, when you step back and you look at the global economy, a country like the United States, we have a $15 trillion economy. We grow at anywhere from 2 to 3% in a good year. That's good for us. By contrast, in sub-Saharan Africa, you have 7 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world. And that doesn't actually include Zambia, I should say, over the last 10, 12, 15 years. That doesn't include Zambia, which is in the second 10. Zambia's growth rate for the last 10 plus years has averaged 7%. That's actually really good. And, in economics, they have this thing called the rule of 7 that basically says if you can average 7% growth for 7 years, you will double your economy.
Indeed.
So if you look at Zambia's economy, it's doubled once already and is in the process of doubling again. So, strictly from an American point of view and the self-interest of Americans, I would like to see American companies being involved in that growth and reaping the benefits of it, because the faster the growth, generally the higher the rate of return. I also happen to think that American companies can, as we would say, do well by doing good. So if they're in a place like Zambia, if they're in African countries, investing, manufacturing, doing business, they will not only make money, they'll also employ people. And American companies are, by and large, pretty good citizens. They pay their taxes, they obey the laws, they hire locals, they train locals, they're good corporate citizens. Part of that, of course, is because they have to be, because we have very strict laws in the United States on corporate behavior. And so any American company that gets involved in corrupt activities is going to face serious penalties. So by and large, they behave themselves overseas. And so I think that more American companies in Zambia would be to the benefit of both the United States and Zambia.
I'm sure I would have said the same if I was representing Zambia into the USA, isn't it?
Yes, your counterpart in Washington feels much the same way that I do.
I would have said the same thing. But however, what would you say bonds these two nations, Zambia and USA? You said that no much trade indeed, but what could...
You mean economically?
Economically. What bonds...
Because politically what bonds us, of course, again, is a love of democracy and of freedom. But if you're talking economically, so if you look at...
Economically in the areas where we could say, I think this is what we've tried to enhance over the years as Zambia and the USA, economically, to better the lives of both the US citizens and the Zambian citizens.
So if you look at the Zambian economy, there are basically four key sectors, and in each one of them, the United States has a role to play, is playing a role, and has a potentially greater role to play. The first and most obvious is mining. We don't actually have an major American mining company active in Zambia at the moment. We have had in the past. There are American companies involved in neighboring countries. And there are lots of American companies that provide support services to the mines. Trucking, for instance, that kind of thing, sell them equipment. So from that point of view, we have a role to play in mining. And I think that as Zambia's mines mature and need, frankly, greater technology in order to continue to be productive, well, that plays to America's strengths, because we're the world's leading country when it comes to technology. The second area that I would highlight is power. You look at Zambia right now, and I got laughed at, actually, over the summer. So we do this celebration every summer for July 4th, our National Day, like your Independence Day. And we celebrated it at my house on the front lawn. And I gave a speech, which is required. And in the midst of that speech, I was talking about what an economically successful Zambia would look like. And one of the things that I mentioned was that Zambia could be, if I use the conditional tense, an electricity exporter. And I think it was maybe 3 or 4 weeks before my speech when the load shedding started in earnest here. And so lots of people laughed. And so I got confused, frankly, because I usually write a couple of laugh lines into every speech, but that wasn't one of them. So I was kind of, nonplussed. And then I realized what I had said and why they were laughing. And I pointed out that it was the conditional tense. But what I would say at this juncture is that despite the load shedding that you're experiencing now, Zambia could be and should be an electricity exporter. You have enormous potential when it comes to the production of electricity. 300 days of sunshine a year, which lends itself to solar power. You have enormous untapped reserves of hydropower. And so there are already a number of American companies that are involved in the power sector, but I think the answer to the load shedding problem really lies with the private sector. And if the government can create an enabling environment that will attract private sector investment, that will inevitably include American investment, again, because we bring very advanced technology to the table. The third sector is tourism. And here's an interesting thing, which I think is probably not very well known. I would argue, first of all, that Zambia underperforms from a tourism point of view. You get about 150 to 200,000 holiday tourists a year. By contrast, Botswana gets 2.6 million. So there's clear room for Zambia to prioritize tourism and attract more tourists. The source of the greatest number of your tourists is, in fact, the United States. A plurality of tourists, in both South Luangwa and Livingston, your two major attractions, are American. So, again, this is a place where if you were attracting still more tourists, a large percentage of those additional tourists would, in fact, be Americans. The fourth area is agriculture, which the government has highlighted as something that it wants to move decisively to diversify the economy into. Well, American companies are already very active in the agricultural sector in Zambia. You have Fortune 500 companies like Cargill, Pioneer DuPont, who are here on the ground in Zambia, who see the country's enormous potential. The largest unused arable land in Africa lies in Zambia. And unlike many of your neighbors, you have plentiful water resources, a near perfect growing climate. So Zambia, again, could be a major exporter of food. And if you look at the UN population figures, we're talking about a significant increase in human population by 2050, I think on the order of 2.5 billion additional people. That's 2.5 billion additional people to feed. So when you look at food security, those parts of the world that are not actually already producing the amount of food that they could are going to be called upon to do so. And I think that includes Zambia.
Your Excellency, you've mentioned very important sectors, 3 important sectors, and 4, yeah, thank you so much. But I'm interested in the 3, and with reasons attached to them.
Okay.
1, mining sector, and of course power issues and tourism. This is why I'm saying 3.
Okay.
But quickly, let's look at the first one, mining. And the reasons why I'm saying they're interesting and important is because, 1, Zambia mainly depends on copper, and our mining sector of late has been not performing very well. This is so because of a slide in copper prices on the international market. And you are saying you're a superpower in terms of mining equipment and so forth.
Technology.
Technology, indeed. And of course, you've got operations in other African countries. But why wouldn't you invest in Zambia? Why wouldn't we see an American company coming to invest in the mining sector in Zambia at the moment?
Well, I think the answer there actually would be just an accident of history, to be honest. So when you privatized your mines, other countries' mining companies, Canada, for instance, Australia, were outbid the American companies. I mean, I don't know the history of each individual mine, but there's no particular reason why American companies wouldn't be active in Zambia. There's nothing that would prevent it. There's nothing that would be an obstacle to that. I would say that when you talk about any mining, actually I would say any extraction-based economy, whether it's oil, whether it's gas, whether it's copper, the problem with all of those is the boom and bust cycle. So the reality of Zambia is that 70% of your export revenue comes from one product, copper.
Indeed.
And I think that the government has the right approach, which is we need to diversify, because if you have a diversified economy, then the ups and downs of one particular product don't affect the entire economy. And so I think that, that they have the right approach. Now it needs to be implemented. And you know, even within mining, it's possible, I think, to diversify to some extent, to look at other types of minerals that could be mined. But the other thing to keep in mind, I guess, is that, you know, what in economics, there are two key things to keep in mind. Everything that goes up goes down, and
Indeed.
everything that goes down
Goes up.
So sooner or later, the price of copper will begin to rise again, but in the interval, it's very important that Zambia start putting in place the kind of policies that will allow the country to prosper, whether copper increases in value or not.
Okay. Do we see any plans of American companies coming to invest in the mining sector in Zambia?
Not in the
Yeah,
immediate, not to my knowledge in the immediate term. But again, I think that that what Zambia needs to do is to create an enabling environment such that that it attracts investors from all over the world, including the United States. And you know, how do you create the proper enabling environment? One of the key things that any investor, foreign or domestic, is looking for is predictability. It's stable policies. So they want to know that if they make an investment today, that investment is protected, that they have property rights, and that they will be able to have control over that asset for a long enough period of time to make a profit, to get their money back, and then some.
So how would you describe the investment policy in Zambia? Are investors protected in your own view?
Yes, but they could be better. I think the problem here actually is not so much property rights as it is the predictability of the environment. So, you know, let me point to an objective source. You know, the World Bank does something called ease of doing business rankings every year. It's a very crude measurement, frankly, but it's a, you know, it gives you a sense of the trends in individual countries. And in Zambia, the trend has actually been in the wrong direction. So according to the World Bank's ease of doing business report, it's gotten progressively more difficult to do business in Zambia over the last few years, and that's something that the government really should be thinking about changing and moving in a different direction. You know, it seems to me that the number one goal of the country and of the Zambian people is economic development. You want to become more prosperous, and I think that that's the appropriate goal, frankly. Zambians are wonderfully smart, creative, entrepreneurial people, and I think that, you know, in the immortal words of Ronald Reagan, the government just needs to get out of the way and let people create a good idea, bring it to market, you know, make money, hire people, drive economic growth. That's what the private sector does. What the government should be doing is it should be providing the foundations for that economy. The roads, which they're doing, you know, the airports, the ports on the river, bridges, whatever it might be, the infrastructure. The power is sort of the natural area where government needs to be involved. And then it needs to provide the regulation for all of that to happen, to ensure that people pay their taxes as they should.
So basically what you're trying to communicate to us is that government is laying too much hands on some of the private sector kind of business, which they should lay off their hands?
Well, let me rephrase this. I mean, Zambia is not a rich country, and yet Zambia subsidizes maize. Okay, people have to eat, but it also subsidizes electricity, and it subsidizes fuel. So all of that money that you're using to subsidize those things is money that you're not spending on educating your youth, which to my mind should be the number one goal of any country that's interested in developing itself over the long term, is educating young people. I mean, if you look at the so-called Asian tigers, you know, Korea, Malaysia, Singapore, all of these countries that sort of jumped the table economically, even China itself, by and large they did it through education. They paid special attention to educating their young people, to giving them the skills that they needed in order to grow the country, to grow the economy.
You talked about power. Zambia can be a major exporter of power to other countries world
Mhm.
over. What do you think is hindering this development? If we are able to do that, you know, blessed with good sunshine, good water, good weather, and everything,
Mhm.
then what could be hindering us from exporting that much needed power, which would bring in foreign exchange, foreign revenue?
Two things, actually. The first is that you had a very significant surplus of power for a number of years. So the last time that Zambia added a significant generating capacity to its grid was the early 80s. Okay, at that point you had about 2,300 megawatts a year. That's essentially what the supply line has been. So your supply line has been like that from, you know, let's say 1983